What's going on, everybody? You're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we're constantly and always still learning. So Panasonic has formally announced all the details and specs of the S1H, which is their full-frame video-centric camera in a DSLR form. Now, when they did a development announcement a few months back, I had my initial impressions video that's right here. But now that we have a lot of answers, I'm gonna go over the features and details that matter to me the most. So I'm liable to go into a couple little different tangents and rants because this is totally unscripted. This is all based on all the information I could find at this moment within 24 hours. So check out the pinned comments below. I will have time codes of when I talk about certain features and when I jump into certain very explanatory, wow, I can't say that, explanatory rants of why I think and feel the way I do about these features. So without further ado, let's get started with number one, the price point. The price point is coming in at $4,000. So this is definitely a step up from the cameras that I'm used to working with for independent filmmakers. So if you're coming from the GH series, maybe you're shooting on the Sony A7 series, or you're in the Blackmagic Pocket camp, whether it be the 4K or the new 6K, this camera is coming in at a nice solid $2,000 more out of your pocket. Whether or not it's justified, we'll get to that. The sensor, number two, it has IBIS. I am so happy that it has IBIS. The GH5S kind of brought me down when they said the IBIS wasn't in it, and they justified it by saying that a lot of professional productions don't want that IBIS there because the GH5's sensor was bouncing all over the place when they had it rigged into a car. So that's why they took it out. I'm so glad they did not take this out within the S1H. Now, they did say a little interesting thing in the keynote. They said that IBIS works great in handheld, and if you turn it off, that it works great when it's rigged up. So I don't know how they're stabilizing that sensor, but for me, I don't care because the fact that the IBIS is there, 2 thumbs up. In terms of the recording medium, at number 3, they're using dual SD card slots. You might have your own opinion on this, that, man, why didn't they go with the XQD or the QXD? I can't remember which one it is. Or why didn't they go with dual CFast 2.0 cards? That's not what I'm arguing here. I just love the fact that both of the card slots are exactly the same type. One downer point for the S1 for me was the fact that they were using 2 different cards. So I can't do really long event recording anymore if I want to record unlimitedly. I have to stop and swap out an SD card. So I love the fact that they didn't do this, and I definitely question why they didn't just do dual SD card slots or dual QXD, XQD, whatever. Why didn't they do both of the same card slots in the S1 and the S1R? Is the S1R? I don't know about the S1R. I really didn't read anything about it, but I know why they did it, but I kind of wish they didn't in the S1 and the S1R. All right, I'm really blazing through this, but the flip out screen. Yes, for the people that want a flip out screen, the flip out screen is there. I actually didn't care when I talked about the S1. I actually prefer the tilt screen based on how I film, but this S1H kind of does both. It can actually tilt and it can flip. And the reason they did this is because the flip out screen no longer smacks into the HDMI cord. Thank you, Panasonic. It doesn't happen to me a lot with the GH5 when I do need to use an external monitor and the flip out screen at the same time, but it does happen enough that it is a pet peeve of mine. So the fact that they fixed this in the S1H, thank you. Please make sure the design of the GH6 also does this, because that would just be great. Now, this feature is actually a feature that I'm extremely excited about, and I completely talked about this almost a year ago when they first had rumors of the S1. This is the multi-crop factor filming. Video recording mode? Anyways, what do I mean by this? You can shoot in full frame, use the whole sensor, or you can shoot in Super 35 and crop in, or you can shoot 1:1, which actually matches up to the Micro Four Thirds 2x crop factor. The reason I said that this was a feature I was hoping the S1 had way back in the day was because I believed that one lens is all you need. Whether you're a narrative filmmaker, you do weddings, you do events, you do documentaries, hear me out here. Let's say you have a full frame 24 to 70, 2.8, very standard. Well, in full frame mode, that's what it is, but in Super 35, it becomes a 35 to 105 millimeter. When you do the Micro Four Thirds 1:1, it suddenly becomes almost a 50 to a 140 millimeter reach. So that one lens, pending the depth of field being a little different, but your focal range, depending on what crop you're shooting in, goes from 24 millimeters all the way to 140. As a narrative filmmaker, that lens, the 24 to 70, that's all I would need to cover an entire movie and never have to switch lenses. And the fact that the S1H does extremely well in low light, that's it. But let's say you do need an extra reach. Because you have awesome low light capabilities in the higher ISO ranges, you could go with a 24 to 105 f4. So essentially, if I'm doing the math correctly, that one lens is going to become a 24 millimeter all the way to a 210. And you're covering that entire focal length between these different crop modes. Now the S1 is capable of doing this with one caveat. You can only shoot 4K video in full frame and Super 35 mode. If you go to the 1:1 Micro Four Thirds mode, you're forced to shoot at 1080p. That is not the case with the S1H. You can shoot 4K all the way through. So, as a narrative filmmaker, that is one thing that really excites me, to know that one lens can handle my entire film. So, yeah, very happy about that. Let's move on. So now we get into a couple gripes, and there's a lot of things that I have to try to explain why it's a gripe to me, and we still don't know how this is going to play out, but let's hear me out. The codecs. The codecs are revealed to be HEVC or H.265 and H.264. At this current time, the HEVC is 420 10-bit when you're shooting in a 6K, and I think in certain 4K flavors at 200 megabits per second. I'm not necessarily sure that in the future, maybe they're gonna have another firmware update that's going to give us the 422 10-bit in the H.265 codec, but they also up the bit rates too in certain other things to get more image quality. I don't know, but it's definitely something that could happen. Because right now, 422 10-bit is reserved at the H.264 codec. Now, I talked about this in my initial impressions. I was really hoping ProRes was in this thing. At $4,000, I was kind of expecting it. But now that we know it's using SD cards, I kind of understand why it's not. But I was also kind of hoping that maybe if you are shooting using SD cards, that maybe you can shoot ProRes Proxy or ProRes Lite. I know there are people that really need that 422, I totally get it, but for me, I would be totally fine shooting my film, my indie film, in 4K at ProRes Lite. That's good enough for me. I don't need to pull colors a whole lot because a lot of the lighting designs that I do already takes into effect what colors I want to begin with. So ProRes Lite would have been good for me, but I get why it doesn't exist because of this thing. I couldn't find it anywhere in terms of the B&H specs sheet or just even people talking about it in general, but there does not seem to be any confirmation that I could find that you can record out of the USB-C port. As of right now, it seems like all you can do is tether into a laptop, which maybe I think you could record from a laptop, but you can't record to an SSD card. I kind of wish that this feature was in there, because if it was, then that could justify ProRes being around. But maybe, I don't know, maybe Apple hasn't signed off on the licensing yet, so maybe it's a feature that could come in the future. I don't know, I kind of pray that it will. But as of right now, within the last less than 12 hours of me combing through everything, I didn't see any definitive confirmation that people said it was a feature that you can record to an SSD. Unfortunate. But here's the thing though, according to B&H Photo, they talk about Panasonic and ATOMOS talking to each other. In fact, they actually said it in the keynote. Basically, this really comes down to, I'm pretty sure Prores Raw is coming to it. It's not confirmed, but I'm pretty sure it's coming because the EVA 1 is capable of shooting or exporting Prores Raw through the HDMI port into a Shogun Inferno. So I'm pretty sure the S1H has to be the little brother to the Ava 1, and Prores Raw is hopefully coming. Don't know when yet, but I'm pretty sure it's coming. All right, I really spewed this out as fast as I could because I really didn't want to try to ramble. This is literally the 4th time I'm recording this, but what is the bottom line here? Is this something that I'm really looking into? Yes and no. Because of the $4,000 price mark, there's actually a lot of questions I have that need to be answered before I can give a nice definitive answer. And what are those questions? Blackmagic Pocket 4K or 6K? These are the 2 cameras that are kind of waning on my decision, specifically because I really haven't seen a whole lot of tests of the Blackmagic Pocket 4K's film codec or color space versus the S1's V-Log, because S1 V-Log is stating 14 plus dynamic range with V-gamut. I need to see how these 2 compare, and then I need to see the 6K Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, that film's color space versus the S1H's V-Log. Is there any difference? Because in my opinion, the 4K and the S1 are going head to head here in terms of price range. The Blackmagic 6K versus the S1H, that is the next thing. I need to know how these log profiles fare against each other, because knowing how they do is going to determine whether or not the $4,000 is actually worth it to me. And I know some of you are going to say, well, wait a minute, Blackmagic lets you shoot B-RAW. Yes, it does. But for me, I don't necessarily want to shoot RAW in general. I kind of just want to be able to shoot. I already exposed everything the way I needed to. I'm just going to push it around in post. So I'm one of those people that doesn't necessarily want to shoot in RAW. So that's all I want to know. What does the log codecs do? After that, it kind of, this is not controversial, but everyone's got a different opinion. In my opinion, when you're done kitting out the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, you're looking to spend another $1,000 in general. So you need the Samsung SD card, unless you want to use the CFast 2.0 cards, which get really, really expensive. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily use that when they're on a budget. So you need to get yourself a bunch of USB Type-C SSD cards, the Samsung T5, I think. You're probably going to buy an external monitor just because the Blackmagic does not have a flip out screen or a tilt screen of any kind. Depending on what type of things you're shooting, especially me when I'm handheld, I always have the camera lower because I'm a very tall person. But the S1H has a flip out screen, so I don't need to worry about having an external monitor if for some reason I don't have it with me. I like the fact that it's going to go into my SD cards, so I don't have to buy necessarily some expensive SSDs. And then the multi-crop factor video recording modes that allows me to shoot in 4K. That whole one lens to rule them all thing really, really that's something that's insane for me, because I could, in theory, shoot an entire film with a single 50mm lens, a cheap one at that. I could literally use a Rokinon f1.4 50mm at full frame, 50mm 1.4, get my shallow depth of field, or go to portrait by going to Super 35 mode, get that nice 70mm look, or go into Micro Four Thirds mode, get to my 100mm. This range is actually where I shoot most of my films. I technically like to go from 35 to 100, but from 50 to 100, that's perfectly fine with me, and I can do it. So if I was to do a whole film on a budget and not spend $1,000 to get a 24 to 70 and just want to shoot with one prime lens, that 50mm is cheap, and it will do exactly what I need it to do. So there's definitely a lot of things you have to consider, and you have to understand how you're filming your films first and foremost, and that's going to dictate your lens selection and how much budget you can save. But the next killer thing is obviously IBIS. Because of the action films that I do and that I prefer to be handheld for certain types of fight scenes, but there are some gimbal stuff that I want to do. the S1H is definitely still better for me. I need that IBIS, I really do. And the fact that the Blackmagic Pocket doesn't have it, and the fact that it has a funky design that doesn't really fit most traditional gimbals, you have to do some modifications of how to slide the weight out that way on the cage. There's too much that I have to do there. I just want to be able to have a traditional DSLR body and call it good. So in terms of deployment, the S1H is definitely something that I'm really, really considering in the future, because here's the second bottom line. It is expensive. I can't afford it. I really can't, because by the time I'm done kitting out everything, I'm probably ending up spending somewhere up to close to $5,000 per camera. And I've been known to shoot 5 cameras at the same time on an action sequence. So that's a lot of money. That's 25 grand that I don't have to give to my team. But that being said, the focus. I know people are gonna hate on the focus, and I hate on it too, because they're still using the depth of focus system, which is just not good and it's not reliable if I choose to deploy it. However, there's rumors that Panasonic is testing out the time of flight system. I'm not going to go into it here, but essentially there are working prototypes that basically show that the time of flight system is going to save Panasonic if they actually finally implement it in their next generation of cameras, because it's going to be way more accurate than phase detect and dual pixel, and it's going to work amazingly well. There's the rumor that it's going to go into the GH6 or GH7 or GH, after that. I'm really hoping it's coming in the GH6. If it comes in the GH6, and assuming they don't nerf the GH6 in terms of features, then there's no reason for me to go to the S1H anytime soon, because that GH6 is going to be my budget-friendly camera that I'm able to give to all my camera operators, and pretty much it's going to do exactly what I wanted to do. It's not going to give me that nice high-fidelity vlog, 14 stops. That's fine. I'm perfectly fine with what the GH5 gives me. But if money was no thing, hands down, in a DSLR format, I would equip everyone on my team with an S1H, a cheap external monitor like the Fotka A50 that I just reviewed, video up here, and a Sigma 24 to 70 f2.8. That is my setup. Every camera operator is going to have that. That is what I want to do, but I can't. Now, the last thing, the next bottom line is Sony, it's in your court now. Panasonic has thrown out their cards. Everything's on the table. What is your A7S III going to be? Do I think the A7S III is going to be a direct competition of the S1H? Not necessarily, because the S1H, I still stand by this, is meant for large budget productions. To them, the S1H is their GoPro. It's their crash cam. It's their little camera that they can toss in the most dangerous of situations, and they don't care, because to them, this is cheap. And they're excited by this. All the DPs they brought in, they were excited because they've been waiting for something in this form factor to match up against their VeraCam cameras, and now Panasonic has finally done it. Is the A7S III going to be the little brother to their FS line and even further? I don't believe so. I think the A7S III is going to be an amazing full-frame video-centric camera at probably $3 grand or $3,200. It is going to be cheaper than the S1H. If Sony was going to really go against the S1H, I would kind of assume that they would do it with their A9 line, not their A7. So that being said, I think a lot of us are going to have some decisions to make if we want to go into the full frame realm, but I have a feeling most people will see more benefit going to the A7S III rather than the S1H. For me personally, again, if I ever have money that I can throw at for my camera team, I would go with the S1H, because to me, honestly, it is the perfect professional full frame video camera. To me, that is my Arri Alexa. That is my Arri Alexa that I can reach and get to, because I can't afford an Arri Alexa. I can barely even afford to rent one. But coming from a GH system, the S1H is my ARRI Alexa, and eventually maybe I will shoot a film on ARRI. But anyways, guys, that is it. I'm sorry that I kind of jumped all around, and if you listen to this, I would love to know your thoughts. Is the S1H good for you? Were you excited that IBIS was in there? Were you more excited about the possibility of shooting in full frame Super 35 and Micro Four Thirds mode, and that one lens could potentially rule it all for you? Because I have to say, if you shoot documentaries for a living and you don't want to switch lenses, that's just amazing to me. So anyways, I am done. What are your thoughts? Leave it down below. Like, subscribe, share this video if you think it's helpful, and I look forward to discussing everything with you down below. Until then, see you next week.